I think a lot of people think that if they see a formerly incarcerated person or a few carcerated stars, that they're somehow anomalies, and they're somehow just those, and we should do what we can for that one. We are not anomalies.
How's everybody doing? My name is Clint Smith. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the Graduate School of Education, and I was asked to start us off with a poem. So that's what I'm going to do, and thank you, everybody, for coming. Beyond this place. The air was thick with ambivalence, the residue of those both forgotten and pushed away. There is a watchtower, too uncertain of its own authority. The slow grating of a mechanical door grants one passage in and out of the yard. The dull gray of clothing renders itself invisible against a backdrop of concrete walls. Barbed wire coils itself precariously around the edges of the asphalt. It can be difficult to tell what they are trying to keep in and what they are trying to keep out. Chain link fences stand upright as soldiers do, only what they are told, only what they have convinced themselves that they have been built for. But is anything built for what it ultimately becomes? When the steel was melded into a false deity, a pretense of human control, did it dream of what else it could have been? The wheels on a child's first bicycle, the monkey bars from which they would swing to and fro, the car a family drives on a cross-country road trip filled with laughter and fighting and spilled ketchup across the floor. When did it learn it was to become a cage? But what is a cage beyond that which it holds? Lance is made of heavy bones and inquisition. He is a soft barrage of endless questions, yet judicious with his words. Tyrus is broad shoulders and calm eyes, elegant dreadlocks falling along his back. Leo is a linebacker swallowed by a young child's laugh, his porcelain head reflecting the incandescent light from above. Chad is a thick New England accent imbued with Boston bravado. His wide-framed glasses consume half of his small face. Daryl is a long salt and pepper goatee that curls back beneath the underside of his chin. He is the gravity that pulls all of us closest to the center. It is a classroom of men who refuse to forget themselves. Each word provides the sort of freedom a parole board can never grant. They write about their families, their children, wanting them to remember that their father was a man whose laugh could turn a room into a festival of rapture, someone who would read them stories before they fell asleep to a world that didn't always make sense, but always made sense in his arms. They want people to remember them as those who existed beyond this place, and that they still do. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Elizabeth Hinton, Assistant Professor in the Departments of History and African American Studies and co-organizer of this historic conference. I am filled with joy and hope standing up here tonight, and I am deeply grateful to every single one of you for taking the time to consider what educational justice means in the nation with the largest prison system the world has ever seen, especially for those groups who have suffered educational injustices historically. Here at Harvard, we champion the importance of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and that commitment requires us to think deeply and critically about models of prison education. What is the role and responsibility of the university, and especially Ivy League universities, in pursuing educational justice through prison education? What would a commitment to inclusive education for people who have been, are currently, or are vulnerable to incarceration and the punitive state look like? How can we build a community of learners that fosters integration among incarcerated and campus-based students as equals? And finally, to what extent will Harvard contribute to the collateral consequences people face as they navigate their return to society? Will we bar them, imposing what some see as a new form of Jim Crow or civil death? Or will we open our gates? That's the question we're going to be talking about tonight. I'd like to thank Hope for their organizing efforts, and the Undergraduate Council for its endorsement of the Beyond the Gates Conference and the demand for prison education and a non-discrimination clause in admissions and hiring at Harvard. On behalf of myself and conference organizers, I'd like to thank all of you once again for coming. Garrett Felber and Kaia Stern, we're all kind of the same person at this point. Your wisdom and courage and your selflessness is invaluable, and it's really been a privilege working with you. We have a long list of sponsors that I'd like to collectively recognize tonight. None of this would have been possible without their generous contributions, and it's a true thrill to collaborate with some of the most exciting programs at Harvard in our efforts. Claudine Gay, Dean of the Social Sciences, deserves a special thanks not only for spearheading the Inequality in America initiative, which has opened up critical new conversations on campus, but for believing in this project from its very earliest stages. We couldn't be here without her fortitude. I'd like to thank the Prison Studies Project for its support, PBHA and HOPE, the Committee on American Studies, Khalil Muhammad, the Safra Center for Ethics, the Charles Warren Center for Global American Studies, Henry Louis Gates Jr. and the Hutchins Center for sponsoring yesterday's Second Chances panel, and the Mahindra Center for making tonight's event possible. I'd also like to recognize the consultants who we just spent the day discussing how to design and implement prison education programs. Rob Scott of the Cornell Prison Exchange, Rebecca Ginsburg of the Education Justice Project at the University of Illinois, Jody Lewin of the Prison University Project at San Quentin, Rachel Hudak of the Prison Education Project at NYU, Jill Stockwell and Matthew Mozicki of Princeton's Prison Teaching Initiative, and Kai Stevens of the Alabama Prison Arts Initiative at Auburn University. Could you all please stand and let us give you a round of applause? In a moment, we will premiere a short documentary our Beyond the Gates research team helped produce on the past and future of prison education at Harvard. 2 documentary filmmakers were involved: Natalie Smith, Harvard class of 2015 and one of the co-founders of HOPE, and Sophie Harris, Oscar-nominated Sundance Award-winning film producer and daughter of political prisoner David Harris. Sophie also happens to be one of my best friends from college. You will feel Natalie and Sophie's commitment to expanding educational opportunities for incarcerated people as you witness their remarkable work. And we would also like to thank Jill Lepore for narrating the film. But the content of the film and everything you're experiencing at this conference wouldn't have been possible without our 2 amazing graduate student researchers, Elsa Hardy and Elizabeth Ross. Elsa is a first-year doctoral candidate in the Department of African and African American Studies, and Elizabeth Ross is also in AAAS and will begin her studies at Harvard Law School next fall in pursuit of a joint JD PhD. Elsa and Elizabeth scour the archives here and around Boston to help uncover the long, rich, and troubled history of Harvard's relationship to prisons in Massachusetts. And I'd like to invite them both to the stage to receive the recognition they deserve from all of us.
In 2011, following the release of a landmark report on the forgotten connections between Harvard University and slavery, President Drew Faust said, "Harvard must do its part to undermine the legacies of race and slavery that continue to divide our nation." One of the most tangible of those legacies is mass incarceration. The Harvard Prison Education Project is an effort to grapple with this history. As Faust writes, to open the gates is to close the gap. Beyond the gates is a call to realize this vision.
"16 years, all right? Massachusetts was at the forefront of the beginning of abolitionism. I was a graduate student here in 96-7, I think it was probably spring of 97, that in another large lecture theater, I heard Angela Davis. It was the first time I had heard anybody make the argument about the school-to-prison pipeline. I had a baby cousin, then in prison, his second year in prison on a term of 12 years and 8 months, and I was confused by Angela. I was confused. then. It's embarrassing to say now. But here we are 20 years later. 16 years. 20 years. All right? Prison education matters, without any doubt. But in the context of getting rid of our use of prison, we're minimizing it, right? So last little point. In Germany, what percentage of sanctions are incarceration? I know some of you know. 6%. In the Netherlands, 10%. In the US, 70%. It is possible to live in a different world, to think of wrongdoing and rehabilitation differently. Buy a plane ticket and go experience it. It's not crazy. It's not a utopia. So the project of rehabilitation is about education for anybody who is incarcerated. And it's about putting that project of rehabilitation in perspective of a transformed criminal justice system generally. So I hope that tonight we're all here to deepen our appreciation for those values. And so I want to introduce our panel. Our first speaker, each person will speak briefly-ish, 8 to 9 minutes, I think, roughly speaking. Is that what we're... Anyway, I'm not totally in control up here. Kaia Stern will go first. You saw Kaia in the video. She has a doctorate in religion from Emory. She is the co-founder and director of the Prison Studies Project here at Harvard. Fierce and fearsome like Elizabeth. This is a woman who is building things and keeping them alive. Darren Mack, next to her, is a social justice advocate and activist. He was born and raised in Brooklyn in 1992. At the age of 17, Darren was arrested and sentenced to 20 to 40 years in the New York State prison system. Several years into his sentence, he was accepted into Bard College's Bard Prison Initiative. After being released in 2012, Darren graduated on Bard's campus with a BA degree in social studies with the class of 2013. Darren is an active member of Just Leadership USA, and in 2016 became one of the leaders of the Close Rikers campaign. Next to Darren, Garrett Felber, assistant professor of history at the University of Mississippi. And he joins Michelle Jones, who I'll come to in a minute, this year as a research fellow at the Charles Warren Center for Studies in American History. He's the co-author of the portable Malcolm X Reader with Manning Marable and the author of the forthcoming book, Those Who Don't Know Say. All right. Next to Garrett, there we go, sorry. Paul Henry Grice III, Executive Director of Liberation Literacy. He strives to encourage, strengthen, and give a voice to those forgotten through his work with the organization and its steering committee in Portland, Oregon. Steve Hahn, historian extraordinaire at New York University, author of A Nation Under Our Feet, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and the Political Roots of Slavery and Freedom. Last semester, Professor Hahn taught a social foundations course, Slavery, Race, and the Making of America, at Wallkill Correctional Facility through NYU's prison education program. José Diaz is a Latino studies major at NYU. As a student, he is seeking to discover the narratives that intersect between race, class, and gender, and how these links could provide the nexus for social parity within social movements. He's a writer and has been working on a writing group called Lives in Transition that uses the power of writing to highlight the personal struggles within our politicized world. He's also a student ambassador for NYU's Prison Education Project. And Michelle Jones, I'm glad to welcome you here. Michelle, as you know, is a first-year doctoral student in the American Studies program at New York University and a research fellow at the Charles Warren Center for Studies in American History here at Harvard. After receiving her bachelor's degree from Ball State University, she completed a 4-year seminary ministerial diploma from the University of the South. Her interests in history, women, race, and prisons led to her to participate in the Indiana Women's Prison History Project with a group of scholars behind bars. Even while she was incarcerated, Michelle published and presented her research findings to dispel notions about the reach and intellectual capacity of justice-involved women, and ultimately presented legislative testimony to the Indiana State Interim Committee on the Criminal Code. Michelle is also currently on the board of Constructing Our Future, a reentry alternative for women created by incarcerated women in Indiana, which provides women leaving prison with access to rehabilitative programming, carpentry job skills, and the means to earn their own home. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. I begin with an invitation. Let us dedicate our presence this evening to someone who does not have the kind of access we do, to such an abundance of resources and vibrant community as this. So many people are present in spirit this evening. We feel you and we thank you. I remember my first time visiting prison as a student. It was 1993, the fall of my senior year at college, when I walked into Greenhaven, a maximum security men's prison in Stormville, New York. I remember seeing the sunlight refract off of the steel shackles around a man's ankles, property of New York State Department of Corrections was written across his back. Something about that vision temporarily blinded me, and the course of my life was altered. The Greenhaven Prison Program, created in 1979 by Vassar College professor Larry Mamiya, focuses on building bridges between college students and activist scholars in prison. Thanks to this program, my life's work is to build the same kind of bridges. Education is meant to transform, to change us, and to change the world. In the documentary, I mention education as a human right. What I did not mention is the collective responsibility necessary to realize that right. What is the value, for example, of the First Amendment of the US Constitution to freedom of speech if there is not also collective responsibility to make sure folks can read and write? As we focus here on the transformative power of higher education in prison, let us not lose sight that there is an urgent need for a continuum of educational opportunity in prison. I pause here on the question of language. Eddie Ellis invites us to consider with care the language we use when speaking about people with criminal records. I urge you to read his letter on the Prison Studies Project website and consider using humanizing language rather than saying inmate, felon, ex-con. Let us talk about mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, people in prison, people with criminal records, people. Yes, President Drew Faust is right. Harvard must do its part to undermine the legacy of race and slavery that continues to divide our nation. From the shadows of US prisons, the 13th Amendment makes a mockery of abolition. And among Harvard students, there is a hunger to learn about the current crisis of mass imprisonment in new ways. My hope is that we will soon have a concentration in justice studies. It is a timely need. Since 2008, when Bruce Western and I launched the Prison Studies Project, we have been connecting students, teachers, and researchers with a shared interest in the American punishment system. We have developed significant relationships across the university, as well as within the national movement for prison education. We created the first nationwide directory of higher education programs in prisons, which aims to increase educational opportunities for people who are incarcerated in all 50 states. Our classes have consistently proven to be deeply transformative for students, changing not only their attitudes about the justice system in this country, but also their career and life goals. Catherine Sirois, who was not able to be here this evening, was a Harvard student in the first class we brought in to Norfolk Prison. Nearly 50 students applied to be part of that junior tutorial. I will do my best to weave her words into my comments. Catherine reminded me that we met on Thursday mornings before sunrise on this very square block. For her, the power of the course did not end when the semester finished. She developed meaningful connections with her classmates, focused her senior thesis on the effects of paternal incarceration on children, received the Hoops Prize, and after graduation continued to work with Bruce Western on the Boston Reentry Study. The Prison Studies Partnership Behind Bars that we forged with Boston University's long-standing prison education program and the Massachusetts Department of Correction marks the first time that in the Commonwealth, the traditional college students learned alongside incarcerated students as part of a curriculum for college credit. Never before had Harvard University students and men and women enrolled in BU's program shared a classroom inside the walls of prison. With a one-year Hilt grant in 2013, we were able to include graduate students from Harvard Divinity School, which marked the first time that post-secondary prison education included inside the prison classroom both graduate and undergraduate students from a traditional college campus. With funding, we will be able to reintroduce, sustain, and measure the impact of the work we have begun. We have a powerful opportunity to institutionalize innovative teaching and learning at Harvard. To be an active community citizen is to reach out to people who are often denied educational opportunities. Harvard's support of prison education is invaluable, as is the experience for Harvard students to learn from peers who are incarcerated. In 2009, Catherine and her classmates wrote to the then dean of the sociology department. In their words, reading about prison and the rise of mass incarceration cannot compare to the actual experience of entering a prison. The class was without a doubt the most transformative, eye-opening course any of us has ever taken at Harvard. You can learn a lot from reading informative articles and books, but you will never truly understand the materials you are studying unless you engage with them firsthand. One of the classmates from Norfolk, George, also wrote a letter about his experience after the course was finished. When our class met, he had been incarcerated for nearly 40 years. In his words, education in isolation does not have the same impact as an integrated environment. After all, isn't that what much of the college experience is built around? Bringing people of varying ethnicities and social classes together so that individuals may become more aware of the commonalities that ultimately make the family of human. My greatest learning experiences have taken place in an integrated environment. These experiences have never failed to leave me with a greater sense of self-worth, along with strengthening my sense of connection to the community at large. Thank you for your efforts in bringing this course into being. I hope this experience marks a return to greater involvement in education and rehabilitation within the incarcerated community. I conclude with Catherine's words that she wrote from California, where she has a PhD in sociology at Stanford. She continues to draw on the lessons that she learned nearly 10 years ago at Norfolk Prison. In her words, "My experience with prison education sparked a desire to more fully understand incarceration in America and to work for change. More than that, the experience underscored the importance of doing this work in collaboration with those who have been most harmed by the injustice of the American punishment system. As a scholar and as an educator, I hope to provide transformative educational opportunities beyond the gates or the palm trees of the institutions to which we are so privileged to belong. In my experience, extending the resources of our institutions lifts up those who have for so long been denied those resources and makes all of us better students, teachers, and citizens. Thank you."
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for being here this evening, the organizers and everyone who came out, and the students, especially the students that was involved with the action this evening. So I am one of 70 million Americans who has a criminal conviction, but I'm also a son. I'm a student, and I'm an alumni of Bard College's Bard Prison Initiative. And hopefully tonight, I hope that I'll be able to share my experience in this program and how it has impacted the work that I do in New York. But I want to share a little bit about what Bard College Prison Initiative has to offer for incarcerated students. So the Bard Prison Initiative extends the full breadth and depth of Bard College liberal arts curriculum into New York State's 6 prisons, 3 maximum security prisons and 3 medium security prisons. Since 2001, BPI has had 800 students enrolled and 450 degrees conferred. Over 340 professors have taught there, 60 faculty members and 11 academic advisors are active each year. Roughly 160 courses are offered throughout the year. BPI offers coursework that spans from sociology to mathematics, science, and my favorite, history. BPI has a reentry and an alumni affairs department, and this department offers students reentry workshops and one-on-one advising. It also facilitates the transition housing for those students who are in need of transitional housing when they return back to society. 74 alumni have continued their education post-release, pursuing their AA degree to their PhD. Schools include, but not limited to, NYU, Columbia, and Yale University. BPI also offers a fellowship and internship programs, such as the Public Health Fellowship, the BPI Task Fellowship, and the Ford Foundation Internship. In 2009, BPI established the National Consortium for the Liberal Arts in Prison to facilitate the further establishment of college and prison nationwide. There are 12 active colleges partnering in this consortium, such as the Center for Prison Education at Wesleyan University, Yale Prison Education Initiative, and Emerson College launched the Emerson Prison Initiative last year. All of this almost entirely privately funded, except perhaps last year they received some money from the governor to initiate, college and prisons. But this education has impacted my life so much in the social justice work that I do in New York that I believe it's time for colleges and universities to stand up, take a stand, and be on the cutting edge of history. Thank you.
So first, I just want to say that organizing this conference was a labor of love, and doing this work is a labor of love. So much love to Elizabeth Hinton, Kaia Stern, Elsa, Elizabeth Ross. Much love, much love. Also, so much love to Paul Henry Grice III. If a year ago you told me we'd both be sitting here doing this, I would have told you were so crazy. And I also want to say to Danielle Allen, although I just met you, I love you because you opened up a space to talk about Angela and abolition, which was what I was going to do anyway, but you made it so much easier. So thank you for that. So first, I would just also like to recognize the other folks from Liberation Literacy who are here tonight: Shane, Jarrell, Dion, Angie. Give it up from Portland, Oregon. But also those who cannot be here, whose voices go unheard because they remain locked up. So to Ben, Kareem, Jelani, Fly, Joshua, Dominique, Ivan, Antoine, Brian, Kanan, and Justin, I love you all, and our collective voice tonight is your voice as well. So I'm a historian, and I say that as a sincere apology. But also to let you know that the reason I do this work is to end injustice. The reason I do this work is to facilitate a platform and resources for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people to lead us to where this society needs to go. The reason I do this work is to liberate all oppressed people. So tonight I want to make the case for abolition and education in prison. But to do so, I want to take us back to World War II. So following the war, a group of mostly men who had been imprisoned for refusing to serve in what they considered an imperialist war gathered together what was called the First Conference on Prison Problems. And they formed two groups, one to deal with concrete problems of the prison, and another to, quote, urge the total abolition of the prison system. They envisioned a future without human caging. They proposed omitting people's names when crimes were publicized in newspapers, appointing a prosecutor of society as a public defender who would present society's guilt at trial. And they demanded an end to mandatory labor without pay and solitary confinement. They drafted a Bill of Rights for incarcerated people, which included an end to racial segregation, workmen's compensation, conjugal visits, end to censorship, and no solitary, no strip cell, no dark cells. Many of these demands remain at the core of the prisoners' rights movement of today, such as Pelican Bay in 2013, the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee of 2016, and Operation Push this year. Yet prison abolition is still an opaque and scary concept for many. It's immediately disregarded as utopian by some and simply undesirable by others. The cries of "what will we do with the violent criminals?" or "I know some people who need to be locked up" chillingly recall the racist paternalism of those who opposed a previous abolitionist movement, that of chattel slavery. Angela Davis points us to these historical examples of dismantling other racist institutions such as slavery, lynching, and segregation, which, as she writes, were considered, quote, as everlasting as the sun. Davis wants us to denaturalize the prison and suggest its historic tethering to economic, political, and social events, As Ruthie Gilmore points out, prisons are, quote, a geographical solution to socioeconomic problems. In other words, they are a product of surplus labor, land, and state capacity. Instead of asking what we will do with people, why not ask what we will do for people? Thank you. Prisons have loomed so large in our political and social landscape over the last century, with their capacity for simultaneous growth and confinement, that they have become ubiquitous in our thoughts and shackled our political imagination. So in 2016, with Paul and others, we founded Liberation Literacy in an Oregon prison as a weekly racial justice reading group with half incarcerated students and half outside community members. And the name Liberation Literacy is a provocation. What does it mean to develop a fluency in a language of liberation? We believe that that is our calling as humans. As the Detroit activist Grace Lee Boggs wrote, a revolution involves projecting the notion of a more human being, one who is more advanced in the specific qualities which only humans have: creativity, consciousness, self-consciousness, and a sense of political and social responsibility. We believe it is an endeavor that can be answered through the collective intergenerational dialogue between those free and unfree. So the group grew to include a quarterly newsletter, documentary film nights, an outside reading group. We built a freedom library with over 600 books on social justice. In fall, we launched a high school chapter. They read books alongside and correspond via letters. And this summer, Liberation Literacy will begin at the only women's prison in Oregon. And one of the arguments for education in prisons is often, these people will one day come home to your community and be your neighbors. Wouldn't you rather they be educated? But we need to rethink community. No matter how remotely prisons are built, how deeply you bury people in isolation, or how restricted physical visitation becomes, incarcerated people remain part of the fabric of our community through family and loved ones and political allies. And we also need to demystify prison abolition and its relationship to education. Because before we dismantle the prison physically, we must also do so intellectually as the central object of our attention. Because conceptually, the prison looms large, while physically, for those not incarcerated and immediately affected, it remains distant. We need to be more proximate to those affected, while destabilizing it in our political imagination. Prisons are not simply the problem. They are the evidence of the problem. They are the love child of what Martin Luther King described as the triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism, which he urgently pressed us to dismantle as part of a radical revolution of values. Prisons embody the degradation of the soul, the commodification of the body, and the depravity of our moral will. And only by thinking beyond prisons and punishment can we begin to envision a society that does not treat harm with greater harm and violence with greater violence. So one part of that project is education inside. And to address the magnitude of mass incarceration, we must utilize the tools fitted to dismantle it, education, and ensure that it is in the hands of those most affected by the system. Marcus Williams, part of our Liberation Literacy family, once told me that politicizing someone's mind is a nonviolent form of resistance. Just as the abolition of slavery was organized and theorized by the enslaved, the movement to end mass incarceration will be organized and theorized by the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. If we truly believe in freedom and justice and a world without harm and violence, the relationship to me between abolition and education is quite clear, and the choice of whether to support them even clearer. So let me welcome to the stage Paul Henry Grice III.
Hello? Oh, my white? Oh, man, I'm glad. I didn't want to go to the podium. The chair hurts. I'm going to be honest with you. How y'all doing? Y'all right? I didn't have the eloquent speech to sit down and say, hey, this is Liberation Literacy. But at the same time, I hope that you feel me. There's a lot of things that happen in prison where you can't feel somebody. You can't touch them. You're not a human. So to have somebody like Garrett come in and see value in you, man, that's priceless. I don't even know where I would be without that. Because I graduated 35 programs being in prison. It's easy. I'm trying to tell you, it's easy. How do you feel? I feel great today. What about you? Say it a different way. I feel better than I did yesterday. Okay, you passed. Let's go. Here's the certificate. Here you go. Get out of here. That was not challenging at all. Garrett brought Malcolm X in, And at the time, I was apprehensive. I mean, just like if you guys could think about being in a prison, you build a certain, I like to call it a beast. You invest in a certain beast in yourself that says, I can't trust anybody. I can't trust the person next to me. I can't trust the CEO. Sometimes I can't even trust my own family, and I'm being serious. So then somebody comes in hands me a Malcolm X book, right? I'm like, okay, cool. You know, I haven't had a chance to read Malcolm. Let me do that. I read it, and then it was like, okay, next week we're going to have a class. Here comes Garrett. Hey, guys, hey, I'm busy. Hey, we got some people outside. Hey, you know, I'm here to teach the class. Whoa. You? For what? Man, I'm leaving, man. Nah, man. Hey, you know, you talk to parties. Hey, man, I'm about to go read that shit book, man. I'm through with this, man. But I gave him a chance, man. No lie, and that was the best chance I took. Because he actually taught me about the Hegel dialect in one setting. I was sitting in the front. I was like, oh, okay, well, you're kind of right, all right? I'll give you that, all right? I'll be back next week. Don't be on the bullshit, all right? That's how I feel. I'm sorry, that's what I feel. But it's break down so many barriers, man. It does. I know a lot of you guys are in here thinking that you can't have an effect or that you can't change anybody's life. You can. Don't quit, don't give up. If he would have gave up, I would have been in there still talking about how I felt. I felt great. I felt better than yesterday. But I had a chance to expand my mind and get challenged. And that's the biggest accomplishment that you could do while being incarcerated is challenge somebody to be better than what they are. I don't know if you understand that, man. You were a number inside. My name is not Paul Henry Grice III, and I say it all the time. Let me say my full name, because for 4.5 years, I was 159800751. Nah, I like Paul Henry Grice III better. I don't know about you. So, liberation literacy, man, how we started out. That's how it started out. I was like, Garrett, hell no, man. And he's in here talking about Malcolm X. But he knew what he was talking about. I'm trying to say it. He knew what he was talking about, for real. And better than a lot of brothers that I knew. So I said, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to give that a shot. So it went from a book club where we read books and sat in circles and kumbaya, right? Then we became a family because they invested in us. I don't think you understand how important that is for somebody to come in every week. My own family didn't come in every week. They damn near didn't even answer the phone, shit. God forgive. But that's how it was. So they came in every week. They hugged me, told me they loved me. That broke down that barrier for trust. So now I can trust what you say. Now I can trust what you do because you're here. Okay, let's learn something. Let's do something. At that time, I don't know about y'all, man, but like family, I'll do anything for family. Even though I don't like them all the time. Garrett. But saying that it became a book club, then it became family, and now we're a movement. We're here. Okay, 3 minutes. All right, 3 minutes. Y'all keep me on track. But with this movement, if you guys have that, I don't know if they were handed, I know they were. Shout out to the team. If you have that pamphlet, that newsletter, it's a newsletter that says Liberation Literacy. Great art on it. I know you guys seen it. Read it. Great. Okay? It's great. But with that was put together by men that were incarcerated at that time, front to back, and being heard. I don't know if you guys ever heard or ever had a family member that was incarcerated, but a lot of us go behind bars and then get forgotten about. We have no voice after that because nobody's there to listen to us. So that's what we do. That's what Liberation Literacy does. We give the voice to the voiceless. We all the way up from Portland, Oregon, from the West Coast. And we're here in Harvard saying, hey, here goes this newsletter with some people you don't know, but read it. It's great. That's what it's about. And I hope you guys really do take the chance to be able to look at that and just accept it for what it is. If you don't want to read it, give it to somebody else. It's cool. I ain't mad at you. A lot of things that I got handed out on this campus that I was like, nah, I'm good. Go ahead. I'm all right. That's just me, though. You know, I'm going to be straight with you. Nope, I'm not reading it. Give it to someone else, all right? Cool, I ain't mad. But this is what we do. Liberation Literacy is not just one facet of it. There's another part of it called the Freedom Library. There's been a lot of talk, and I'll give it up for everybody that's on this panel again. All right, give them up for them. Y'all doing it. Y'all doing it. I salute. Hey, we here, okay? I've turned up a little bit. Hey. What I was saying about the Freedom Library, man, we brought in over 650 books inside of a prison. Now, if you guys understand about prison, it's been around for a long time. Okay, with that long time, it has been all these old books that are in there that we have access to. Right now, you guys have laptops, you guys have phones. Oh my God, I still don't know how to work my phone. But what I'm saying with that is that you guys have access to Google and all these things. We don't have that. We have a book from 1972 talking about what the world used to be. So we were able to bring in books with the Freedom Library. Shout out to Kathleen Gable. We appreciate you. We love you. But they, oh yeah, I'll give them a clap real quick. I appreciate it. So with that, it gave us access to that information that was new, that was present. That's the key. Give us the information that's new. Stop feeding us these old things. We need that new thing. So be able to, Freedom Library, Liberation Literacy. Last thing I had to say, because I got to go. I done got cut off. Let's put your L's up, man. Put your L's up. I love you.
I think I better stick to the podium. First, let me say it's a great honor and privilege to be on this panel and to be, and to be here with all of you, and to thank Elizabeth Hinton and all her colleagues for putting this together. I just want to be very, very brief and leave more time for my NYU colleagues, José Diaz and Michelle Jones, who have much more important things to say. My second class meeting at Wallkill last fall, one of the students turned to me and said, "Why are you here?" I told him that there was a lot of selfishness involved, that I had taught in numbers of non-traditional programs, one of which I met Danielle years ago. And they included, on occasion, students who had been incarcerated, and that I learned an enormous amount, that I was challenged in ways that I had not been in a usual college classroom, that I invariably left thinking and asking myself questions that I normally did not, and that I was involved in the program because I was hoping that this would happen as well. And my first thing I'd like to say is what an intense and rewarding intellectual environment it is for all of us, and how much we can learn, those of us who are teaching in the program, as well as those who are students in the program. The second point is that I don't think we can underestimate the challenges that we face in contexts of confinement. Challenges about the limitations of resources, the limitations of contact time that we can have with students, their access to the internet or to study materials, and that these are issues that we really need to think hard about and push against. I also think we have to recognize that in putting programs together, that students on the inside and those who have been on the inside need to be as actively involved as those of us who are at universities and colleges and are interested in advancing these programs too, which also include issues about what happens in a world of post-release, as well as what happens before that takes place. And finally, simply to say that one of the things about these programs, to me, that has such great potential is constructing a model of intellectual life and decision-making that at this point does not really exist in our society, and the opportunities that we may have to participate in it.
Hello, everyone. Oof, I'm nervous. So one of the things I always like to think about when I'm on platforms is, what am I doing here? What do I represent to everybody in the audience? Am I somebody that's being truly included in on the conversation, or I'm over here being platformed or like window dressed so that people could see what people who have been incarcerated look like, how we talk, act? And that's one of the things I think we have to be aware of. Do people who have been incarcerated lend credibility to programs? Are we a part of forming the programs for us, by us? And much of that is what I do with NYU Prison Education Program. I make sure I bud myself in every room possible to chime in on something that I may not be expert about, but I know how it would affect me. And in turn, they listen. And I think that's extremely important when dealing with the success of programs. But the question is, what does inclusivity look like? What does it mean to include people? Are we really that progressive? And these are some of the things like I always love to think about. But the thing is that, how could it go wrong? The whole point of prison education programs is to educate. And it's not a method of reformation. Education doesn't reform people. People reform people. Education empowers. It allows me to say nice fancy words that I don't use, but it's just basically moving beyond tokenism. And that kind of brings me back to something that Frederick Douglass was talking about in his autobiography. And, he had a question of people who were there helping him. Am I here just to be a token and just a mouthpiece, or am I here to actually affect change? And then thinking about, a lot of the books I've read, sometimes you have to get in and be a token until you're not a token, until you are affecting change. And so a lot of that, like I said, to relate it back to prison education programs, and it's something truly, truly touched me today, was being included in on the discussion today and not being the only person who has been incarcerated in on discussion. That's very important. There has to be more of that. And, very nervous. Thank you. And I think more and more importantly, we have to get people involved more and more and more until everybody's sick and tired of hearing it, and then do it again. Because there's a shortage. There's a shortage of help, there's a shortage of funds, there's a shortage of education, and then you question, how do you change society? How do you reproduce something better than the last generation? It's education. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So I got to piggyback off of José real quick, because I'm just going to put this aside. Piggy. We started a thing called Piggy today because people kept piggybacking in the meeting. Long story. Anyway, I'm thinking about a woman who suggested that I was a Black exceptional Negro recently. And I want to address that because I think a lot of people think that if they see a formerly incarcerated person or a few carcerated stars, that they're somehow anomalies, and they're somehow just those, and we should do what we can for that one. We are not anomalies. All throughout prisons across the, Yeah, yeah, yeah. All across the country, there are thousands of incarcerated people who have been lucky enough to have access to a higher education that allowed them to display what they already had within them. I came into prison with a set of skills, with a capacity, right? And a higher access to a higher education gave me a means by which to develop that. And I think we need to remember that because we are people who happen to be incarcerated, as opposed to some monster that has been transformed by the magic of education. Check that. So the thing I wanted to talk about with my brief time is you cannot teach what you do not know, and you cannot lead where you will not go. So for a public university to have a stance on incarceration any kind of way, in your sociology departments, your criminology departments, your history departments, if you are not having conversations and engaging with people on the ground in these institutions that you're writing and publishing and making a career on, you are lost, period. Because you have to be engaged, directly engaged with the people that are directly impacted, because your critique is shortened if you're not, and you're dealing with numbers and quotes and dealing with other people, what other people said and did, and you are not getting an on-the-ground experience. You cannot teach what you do not know, and you cannot lead where you will not go. So we applaud and we need to support those people who are willing to go into institutions and create programs via or example, as the NYU programs that are fully funded and backed by amazing foundations, or the grassroots people who went into prisons with nothing but books, papers, and pens and created grassroots higher education pre-college programs where people could get trained to finish their GEDs so that they could eventually pass in college application entrance exam. You cannot teach what you do not know. And these universities need to examine, what do you not know about these men and women who are incarcerated by the thousands, by the millions? We are people who have a contribution to make to academia and the world, period. Leaving us out with exclusionary practices based on race, sex, class, gender, and criminality, you are lost. And you are missing the point. You're missing the beautiful critique. You're missing that extra examination that comes from my experience having been incarcerated. You're missing that how I might be able to inform cultural anthropology, sociology, history, English, literature, arts. You're missing out on what my experience has to offer your university, what the formerly incarcerated and the incarcerated have to offer your university. You are lost. You cannot teach what you do not know, and you cannot lead where you will not go. Thank you.
Words of wisdom, honesty, courage, generosity, equality, power. Questions? So yes, up, you're up.
Hello. This on?
It should be.
Yeah? Well, I'll go on. So I'm going to try to condense. Education as an institution can be racist. And so how do we ensure that educational institutions that do become a part of prison reform do not perpetuate a cycle of oppression through reinforcing a hierarchy? Meaning, connecting, bridging over here, my heart a beat fast. How do we remain aware, because we talk about being aware of the discourse, how do we remain aware that prison reform or prison abolition or prison and education do not become a tool to reform people of color? Like, my father's first generation Jamaican, and he would say to some people in my family who were low income, he would say, if you can't go to school, go join the military. So people join the military to access cheaper education, access money for education. So how do we make sure that that discourse doesn't push low income POC into prison, because that could be a possible way to have access to education?
Who wants to jump in? I know lots of you, everybody's got thoughts. Go for it.
I'll speak up then. Yep. Or you want to go?
No.
Both of you, take your turn. Yeah.
Okay. I think the biggest disconnect that any type of situation like this is a disconnect for finance or entrepreneurship. Like giving us access to those books and to that knowledge to be able to build our own, to have our own, to sustain our own. I think that's the biggest accomplishment that we can do. So to be able to answer that question, that would be my answer. Is I'm gonna teach you how to get your own. I'm gonna teach you how to fish. Isn't that the quote? I think that's the biggest thing that we could do in that type of situation. Is not just so much as focus on the educational part, rather than teach me how to have it and sustain it. And those are not always just in a book. It's with contacts, it's with networking, it's with meeting people that also have that same vision, the same dream. I think that's important.
Michelle?
Yeah. Well, and I would add to that, okay, so the reform narrative or the rehabilitation narrative is that the benevolent educational institution has descended upon high and has poured out itself upon the lowly prisoner, and now he or she is made new. One way to counter that is to, how should I say this? One way to counter that is to reaffirm that that person was a person prior to incarceration. So then now incarceration and access to higher education isn't making you and reform, and in terms of the reformed individual. No, the person was a person when they went in, and access to the opportunity, higher education is giving them a trajectory, a pathway to be something more, not be made, just an access to be more.
Garrett?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. In general, wow. You think of it like, how does colonization work? How do we decolonize the minds of people? I always like to say the bad guys won, but we're still fighting within that system. The only way to make sure that things do not get reproduced is through constant struggle, and always allowing the people who you're creating programs for to chime in, to eventually come in control and have the programs themselves. This is the point of education. Eventually, I would like to say, hey, I run my own. And this is how you don't be racist. Because you've been through the system, you know the system. It's nothing more powerful than a person who is from that oppression, speaking about that oppression, and empowering other people.
So just to follow out the conversation, I introduced the examples of Germany and the Netherlands, and the better way of talking about the commitments that undergird those approaches to sanctioning systems is what they call a principle of association. I didn't use that phrase because we don't talk that way. But we need to. And what the principle of association is the basic idea that people are people. And I like to go back to ancient things, and so I always, for me, a quotation that matters a lot is Aristotle's quotation that a person who lives alone is either a god, if they can survive that, or in his words, it makes them a beast. Now that's the bad image that we have, but it's true that being pulled out of society is bad for people. It doesn't give us a chance to be the people that we can be. And the point of the principle of association, thinking about that as the core of a way of thinking about responding to wrongdoing and making all involved whole after it, is that people need the chance to be people in society, build their own communities. And so there's a lot of, it's not just education, there's a lot of self-governance, self-organization, living on one's own. That is a part of the criminal justice system in Germany and the Netherlands. It's a completely different way of thinking about how it is to make everybody whole in the wake of a rupture in our social relations in an act of wrongdoing.
I just wanted to add one quick thing, which is I think these sort of, we should be cautious. I think the question is well taken because we need to be cautious about how these programs are framed and enacted. But that it's not just about prison abolition, it's also about decolonizing the academy. Like, we're not saying that higher education is this pure, benign, benevolent thing that offers, an antidote to mass incarceration. It's a dual project. It's about rethinking higher education and punishment, and really just fundamentally creating a new world that does not simply replace. I mean, we can't just bring in the neoliberal university into the prison and by proximity say, oh, that's abolitionist work. It's not. That's colonizing.
Right.
That's colonizing. All right.
Salma, and are you guys waiting for questions over there? Okay, so Salma, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Salma. I'm a sociology concentrator, sophomore at the college. And I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. I think I've come to realize, first off, how inspired I am by all of you, all of the work that you all have done pushing for education programs at your specific institution. So thank you. But I've also come to realize sort of the gaping holes in my education. Studying sociology and studying part of, these are the issues that we discuss. And I think, quite honestly, I've become convinced that the center of a new civil rights movement will be around incarceration and around criminal justice reform. But I, being at Harvard, we're supposed to be receiving some of the foremost educational opportunities, and my education can't be complete if I'm not interacting with and invested in the institutions that we are examining or trying to dismantle. So I know we're trying to establish a prison education program at Harvard, but that'll probably take a while. I'm crossing my fingers that I'll be able to see it. But what do we do in the interim? I have 2 years left here. How do I make sure that I make the most of my educational opportunities while I'm here? How do I get myself into these situations and experiences and opportunities, and how do I do that now?
Who wants to jump in? Kaia, you're here on this campus. What would you advise?
Sure, thank you for that question. So there are opportunities currently through the Phillips Brooks House Association. That's a long-standing student-run organization at Harvard that I think all the faculty needs to really learn from. And there are opportunities for true engagement with community. So that's one place. I'm hopeful that, you said you have 2 more years. I'm hopeful that there will be opportunities to be learning alongside and from and with and collaborating inside prison walls in the next 2 years. There are also organizations outside of Harvard. Concord Prison Outreach, for example, offers an array of educational opportunities, from restorative justice to horticulture, to tutoring folks to get their high set, the GED in Massachusetts. We work in 8 prisons and 1 jail. I mean, there are definitely opportunities, and I'd be glad to speak with you at length about that. But your impulse to engage and to identify our own gaps in learning. I remember listening to a speech that Cornel West gave at Brown University a while ago, and he talked about education as kind of dying to parts of ourselves. And I think of snakes shedding their skin, and being being vulnerable and raw to the elements, and that dying to parts of ourselves, to like tacit presuppositions, and then it can be a painful, uncomfortable process. And I think, with attention to self-care, stepping in to those things that make you tremble, and those unanswered questions, and the things that are unresolved in our own hearts. I'm quoting Rilke here, but that's power, that's education. So I think your position and your curiosity means you're on the right path, for sure.
So that the question makes me want to ask a related question of our panelists, which is just plain, give us a curriculum, right? Let's sort of turn the tables around. What should we all here be reading? So I think about Dwayne Betts' book in the first instance. But what Quest for Freedom, I think his book is called. What else should we be? What would you put on our syllabus for us?
Black Marxism.
Black Marxism?
Yeah, definitely that.
I'm sure everybody's reading that, right? I mean, there's certain books that you must read.
I would say the biggest book that helped me was Elizabeth's book. That helped me. That broke it down in a way that helped me understand. I give it up to you. Thank you. I also would say that I like George Jackson, but I don't know if everybody can handle that. But I think Flo Kennedy, her autobiography, if you guys have a chance to be able to read that, it's talking about the things. So I'm guessing that you're in this room for a reason, because you have an interest. And to be able to have that interest would mean like, hey, I want to help, or I want to be able to continue to do that. That gave me an access to say, oh, that's what that looks like. Oh, everything is not all crystal clear and happy-go-lucky. Like, there are some struggles to be able to help other people that are oppressed. But having that spirit attracts other spirits. Like, I love energy, as you can tell. But just keep doing what you're doing. And I would say the best thing I'm sorry about that.
No,
but I would say, to answer your question too, because I want to put that in there, start donating books to prisons and jails. Like, new books, please.
Could I just jump in on just really quickly, two things. So one is there's also organizations in Boston, run by formerly incarcerated people that are doing this work. So Emancipation Initiative, Andrea James's group, Black and Pink. So just get out in the community and start doing that work and working with people.
Yeah, National Council of Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls.
Exactly.
It's a long title.
Yeah, that's why I avoided it.
I saw you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Darren, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, basically, history made a huge impact on me, learning about the struggles and the resistance that people oppressed have engaged in throughout history. Particularly, it was one history class that I took. It was U.S. women's history, and it was a situation where there was 3 immigrant women working in the factories in New York. And they organized. They was in their teenage, 16, in their early 20s. And learning that motivated me, if these young women could organize and fight the status quo to make changes that we benefit from today, like the 40-hour work week and vacations and things like that, and good working conditions, then I can do something as well. Mm-hmm. So history definitely, was the catalyst that changed my track from being a historian to doing social justice work.
You can do both, too.
And my list is long. Just Mercy, Evicted, City of Inmates, Resisting State Violence, Talitha LaFloria's book, Sarah Haley's
Chained in Silence.
Chained in Silence, Jane Mannion's Liberation Prisoners. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, there is a new field developing called critical prison studies in the American Studies Association, ARM. And that canon is already blown up. I mean, obviously Miss Hinton is in it, but Heather Ann Thompson and Khalil Gibran, I mean, this is a canon of critical prison studies work that is going to be very important for our work down the road. So keep a lookout for that. American Studies is getting ready to produce a review, right, of the critical prison studies field that'll be out in the American Quarterly. Keep up with that because it's developing its own genre.
Steve, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to add that I would walk into class and 2 or 3 of the students would be carrying an anthology of Machiavelli's writings because they were taking a politics course. And 2 of the students were poets and would read their poetry. And at the NYU program, we're talking about expanding the number of courses that we offer, which now include environmental science and classics course and politics course, as well as writing courses. So, I mean, this is, the possibilities for really an expanded universe of intellectual engagement are really terrific, and it's something that so many people are just eager, hungry to buy into, and will be part of a new and developing discussion about where we are and where we want to go.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what's wrong with y'all on this half of Sanders Theater, but nobody's come down on that mic yet. So get yourselves going, please, and then over here for now.
Hi, thank you again for speaking. My name is Natasha, and I am a student at the Ed School, and I echo a lot of what the previous question asker said about the gaping holes in my education and so much that I have to learn. And with that, I'm really curious about the role of identity development within prison education, particularly through the lens of gender, given that prisons exist within our gender binary right now as we conceptualize it. So I'm thinking about how identity development factors into way prison education is taught, how safety factors into that, and would be curious to hear your thoughts.
So, wow, that's interesting. The development of identity, you think about it in a sense like from a historical context that people of color have been long stigmatized. How does education work to destigmatize? You know about it now. That much, and just studying that stuff, and when especially like you think about like queer studies, how does that work within prison? How are, let's say, men being prejudiced towards people who are lesbian, gay, so on and so forth? It's always something that you have to progress towards understanding. So one of the things that I've done, like with my research with NYU Prison Education Program, is part of my research was doing interviews and asking guys basically, hey, what do you think could improve this program? Now that you know these things, like how do you politicize or depoliticize, or I don't know, the best way to put it is like, how do you get people to move after they have this education? And I really think like, when it comes to these studies, from what I know, it's lacking because in the classrooms, it's a lot of privileged students. So they don't know about this. And the best way is like some of the advice that Garrett has said, is like get out in your communities. Be a part of like the political action. That's all.
I would add just really quick. In prison, when you're taking these classes and you have to come up with studying race, and you have to come up and studying race and sexuality and gender, you will be met and buck up against your own prejudices. And it's critical then to have a faculty in that room that has the maturity and the capacity to allow people who came from whatever neighborhood they came with, we all end up in this classroom together to deal with and process our own prejudices. I mean, we bring them in. There are people who sat in classes that did not want to study research about queer people because they were against homosexuals, but it was part of the curriculum. So I'm saying that this is when providing access to a higher education becomes really critical, because these people we all need to have these conversations. We need to hash out and discuss race and culture and class and sexuality, but it needs to be in this environment with amazing faculty that can filter and process and synthesize it. Because there are women who are sitting right next to them, and maybe they are super fundamental evangelical Christians, and they're sitting next to someone who is GNC, gender nonconforming, and the teacher has to manage that space, right? They can't go back to their housing unit with the same mentality. Something's going to crack or shift. And that's what's important. Women and men are dealing with identity issues. Who are they going to be in prison? And then who are they going to be when they get out of prison all the time? Mm-hmm. And so that is the perfect place to deal with it, with an amazing faculty, amazing environment to discuss these things and hash them out so people can break some of the prejudice, some of that programming that they received, that they brought with them to prison. Mm-hmm. It's a perfect place for that. I mean, obviously, we don't want people to be in prison to learn, to have that. I'm talking about the power of the classroom and the importance of that. So it is a place where you will buck up against your identity issues and your prejudices. Whether you are in prison or out, the classroom is the place, one of those places where that happens, and that's just what should happen.
And like, especially so is like when, like for me, it was interesting when you start to think about like, what does equality look like? And some of your biggest allies like happen to be queer. You start, and then one of the things that that kind of like, that had me thinking was an article that one of the professors, George Schulman, wrote in. He's a guy who spent a lot of time just
Yep, I know George. He's one of my buddies.
Yeah, going through a lot of philosophy.
That's
like
great.
He had me read Kierkegaard, and I took leaps of faith. But the interesting thing is that when I started reading about the Black Lives Matter, who started like creating the Black Lives Matter, they were queer people, but they're totally like erased out of the conversation as if they don't exist. And to have like more of a presence of queer people inside prisons, also talking, especially like queer people who are formerly incarcerated. How does that look like? How does that experience, how does, machismo erase a lot of things or cause trauma within within a traumatic place? But yeah.
Yeah. I think some folks did come down to the mic on this side. Is that true? Here we go.
So my experience volunteering in prisons is with Concord Prison Outreach in Concord, and it's very unique that they have that organization. But as Kaia knows, when you go to the board meetings or the events to hear entertainment or to be thanked as a volunteer, it's a lot of older, retired people, essentially. I definitely stick out when I'm there. So I'm curious, for liberation literacy, did you make an effort to get a cross-section of people, a diverse group of people in for the program? What did that bring to the program? Or just with programs you're familiar with in general? I can only speak from my Concord experience where it's really unique. So I'm curious if that's the exception, the rule, what can we do to get a variety of people involved? Thank you.
You want to start? You should start that out. You was doing it before I did. Well, okay, so we partner with, I wouldn't say partner with necessarily, but Reed College, like, shout out to Hen Dog, that's my guy. But there were people from all walks of life, and then it became like a fire, if you would. So at Reed College, there was like 2 students, then it was 3, then it was 5, then it went back down to like 2 for a minute. But then again, now it's like a waiting list of like 20 people. That's at Reed College, that are young, that are vibrant, that are, pushing this issue just as much as us. So I think you, being who you are, is setting a fire for, this institution right here, because then they come to you, then, oh, how did you get in? I think another attraction is not just making a classroom just all about books and study, it's about relationships too. So we have a movie night, like at least once a month, where we watch a movie and we invite other people in. So it'd be like, you bring a guest. Not only do like you bring a guest from the outside, but you tell the people that are incarcerated, hey, you bring a guest too. Because then that starts another conversation. And then those conversations start. So that's what I'm saying. It's about, I would advise that. Have a movie night. Invite some people. Say, hey, you want to go to prison? Come on.
I think we got time to get in one more question. So back over here.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate being the student of you all tonight and what you shared. So my question is, I think, connected to some of what you've already shared in answer to some of the other questions, but I teach a course over at the Ed School, and This January, I had the privilege of helping lead a course with Kaia in Concord within the early release prison there. And some of what I've heard you share about some of the programs that you've experienced as being really impactful and significant are those that integrate students from universities in with folks who are incarcerated and folks learning together. So my question is, in thinking about that, I'm inspired by that. I also find myself worrying about the way that privilege in those kinds of spaces tends to be centered and center itself. I worry, frankly, about the impact of bringing students from here in there and the damage that they might do. And so how do you think about that pedagogically? How can you make sure that it is a learning space for all, and especially in a learning space that centers it? So I'm curious to hear from your experiences what you've found to be effective in that way.
So the prison education program has come to Indiana Women's Prison 3 times. The latest one was with Dr. McCall, Dr. McCall Siegel. And I think that you underestimate your students. I think the women who are I don't know, is Concord a men's facility or men's facility? Okay, the men in that educational space, those students will set the tone. They bring their culture to the classroom. So in my experience, we set the tone. How we were as college students inside set the tone, and then the other students came in, read us, and they acted in kind. Also, we made a general list of common rules. Beautiful thing about Inside Out Prison Exchange is that how it runs in a day-to-day class experience is agreed upon by all of us. And we kept to that, right? And I think that's important because now our culture is blending with their culture and you build a unit. I think don't underestimate your students to have the willingness to show up and conduct themselves in such a way that they don't negatively impact the classroom. I mean, of course, there's potential for someone to act a fool. There's someone to act a fool in this room, but
I think that was me.
right. No, but have more faith in your students. The culture will be built as in cohesion together, a co-learning, a co-meaningful, meaning-building experience.
Yeah.
Last word.
Yeah, I'll just add that, within the last 5 years since I've been home, I graduated on Bard College campus. And for about probably 6 or 7 years, every time when they call the person's name to receive their degree, when a Bard Prison Initiative student is about to get his degree, they stop everything, and the president of the college makes sure that people know that this student is from Bard Prison Initiative, and he's here today to graduate with everyone. So everyone is aware of it. So I think that helps develop relationships, because we have also students from the campus that come inside the prison and take their course with incarcerated students. So that might be a way to help develop that.
I think this has lit a fire. Yeah? Have people? Has this lit a fire? Thank you so much to all of you for the generosity that you brought to joining us in this conversation and helping Elizabeth and her remarkable team take this to the next level so that we can take this conversation on our campus to the next level. Thank you again. Thank you.